Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Rutherford Hayes and the focus is the Republican nominee. The year is 1872 and Hayes has just finished his second term as governor. He has stood down and he'd be out of political office for the next 3 years, but it would not be away from politics. He actually went to the Republican National Convention that year. It's 1872, Philadelphia, Ulysses Grant renominated. Hayes was fully in support of that. In fact, the Republicans put him on the platform committee, showing he was a bit of a party insider. He also decided to run for office that year, which was a bit of a surprise because he ran for a job that he didn't care for very much the last time he had it, and that was his old congressional seat. His friends were pushing him. He reluctantly said, okay, I'll run. He did not win, a rare political setback for Rutherford Hayes. As he lost to Henry Banning, a Cincinnati lawyer, the Democrat won that seat, so Hayes backing away from politics for at least a little bit. Ulysses Grant did offer him a job, maybe a sort of a consolation prize, to be the treasurer. They're based in Cincinnati, the U.S. treasurer position. He said no. He had been a two-time governor. He thought this was a bit of a step down. He'll just stand down from politics for a couple of years. Well, there were some life events that also impacted Hayes at this time, including the passing of his uncle Sardis Birchard. Now, Birchard had been just a critical part of Hayes's life. He was a father figure, obviously an uncle, a brother, a pen pal, a correspondent. It was also a financial backer. It was the largesse of Sardis Birchard that actually kept Hayes going when his law career wasn't doing all that well. And when he wanted to go off to expensive schools, Birchard was the one who actually paid that bill. And his largesse continued even in the afterlife. After he died, he bequeathed most of his fortune to Rutherford Hayes, including his beloved Spiegel Grove, the place that would become Hayes's favorite place on earth. Hayes would never have to work again. He was set for life. Sardis Birchard continued to have a very prominent and positive impact on the life of Rutherford Hayes, even after his passing. Hayes and his wife Lucy also had another child. Their eighth and final child was a boy named Manning, who was born around this time. He did not survive. He died in infancy. That would be 3 of the 8 children did not make it out of their youth for the Hayeses. The other 5 would grow into adulthood. Look, family continued to be incredibly important to Hayes. It was the center of his universe. Beginning with Lucy, that bond was as tight as ever. With the children as well, he would be a proud family man really till the end of his days. Political issues continued to matter for Hayes, even if he wasn't in political office, and education, universal education, was one of the big ones in his mind, particularly focused on the blacks in the South. He said, look, if the freedmen are ever going to have a chance to make it in society, they need to be educated. And he communicated this to his friend in Texas, Bryan, in a letter in which Hayes wrote, it seems to me that the most important thing in Texas, as everywhere else, is the education for all. I, of course, don't believe in forcing whites and blacks together, but both classes should be fully provided for. I recognize fully the evil of rule by ignorance. The whites of the South must do as we do, forget to drive and learn to lead the ignorant masses around them. Well, most in the South simply weren't interested in this perspective. They just wanted the federal government out of their business, as Reconstruction, including federal troops, were still part of the equation in several of the states in the South. That's what they wanted to end. They weren't really focused on education for blacks. Well, Hayes' friends kept calling and wanted him to run again for office. This time, another old job, governorship. The Republicans had actually lost the governorship to the Democrats in the middle of the 1870s. First time in a couple of decades that had happened, and they wanted to win it back, and they felt the best chance was, let's put old Rutherford Hayes back up for that office again. But Hayes had said, look, I'm already supporting somebody else, Alphonso Taft. I've given him my public support. Well, his friends said, enough of Taft. We want you because you have a better chance of beating the incumbent, winning back that spot. And Hayes said, look, it's up to you guys. You hold your state convention. Whatever you decide is fine with me. They did that, and Hayes outpolled Taft 2-1, and he finally had his chance to run for governor for a 3rd time again, in which he said, now that I am in for it, I rather like it. He was getting excited, in part because it wasn't just about the governorship. There was something else on the mind of the people in Ohio, and Hayes noted it. Several suggest that if elected governor now, I will stand well for the presidency next year. How wild! What a queer lot we are becoming. Nobody is out of the reach of that mania. Why so much mania for Ohio? Well, Ohio was now the 3rd most populous state in the Union. It had the 3rd most votes in the Electoral College after New York and Pennsylvania. Hayes, Ohio, popular state, war hero, maybe have a chance for the presidency. But first he'd have to win back the governorship, and he did that quite easily. He beat that incumbent William Allen by about 5,000 votes. First time ever, third time governor in the state of Ohio is Rutherford Hayes. Nationally, Ulysses Grant, President of the United States, announced no third term for him. He's not going to run again. He'd actually had a pretty tough second term, a lot of corruption in his cabinet. He'd also had the panic of 1873, the economic doldrums still facing the country, and so the Democrats thought this was their chance to get back in the White House. And they rallied around the governor from New York, Samuel Tilden. What did Tilden believe? Civil service reform. He believed in hard currency, and he was sympathetic to the plight of the Southern folks who wanted the federal government out of their business, possibly an end to Reconstruction. These were thoughts, by the way, that weren't that different from Rutherford Hayes. Tilden's the nominee for the Democrats. What about the Republicans? Well, they had a front runner, the Speaker of the House. James Blaine from Maine seemed to be the one who had most of the support. Hayes actually at this point didn't think he had much as a viable candidate. He noted, my independent position, aloof from the bargaining, puts me outside the list from whom the managers will select. It's only in the contingency of a union between those who look for availability in the candidate and those who are for purity and reform in administration that I am probable nominee. Talking a lot about civil service reform, which Hayes was very much for. Kind of a mixed bag, though, within the political class within the Republican Party. So maybe a fit, maybe not. Blaine himself was a bit of a flawed character, a flawed candidate, and so there was going to be potentially some openings. And Hayes also had maybe one other thing to his advantage. He was the hometown candidate. The Republican convention that year was held in Cincinnati in June of 1876. Now, of course, he would not attend. Candidates didn't go to conventions back then, but he had plenty of supporters. He had former Union General Edward Noyes there representing him as kind of his lead manager. His son Webb Hayes was there as well, kind of his eyes and ears. And things on the eve of the convention, getting serious. Hayes did confide to his diary. If he did get the chance, he was confident he could do the job. Hayes wrote that it seems to me that good purposes and the judgment, experience, and firmness I possess would enable me to execute the duties of the office well. I do not feel the least fear that I should fail. Would he get the chance? Blaine the front runner, others in contention. Roscoe Conkling from New York, Oliver Morton, the governor of Indiana, Benjamin Bristow, the former Treasury Secretary, he's from Kentucky. They're all in the mix. Hayes' strategy was, don't offend anyone. He told his supporters, look, if Blaine doesn't get it, I want to be everyone's second choice, and that might get me the nomination. Well, let's see what happens. June 15th, the nominating speeches all took place. Hayes, of course, one of the several that were nominated. Blaine's folks immediately wanted to vote. They wanted to close the deal that night. And a bit of a break for Hayes is that the delegates decided to break for the evening. And a lot of backroom discussions occurred that night. And basically, the conclusion was, we don't like James Blaine for the non-Blaine supporters. If we're gonna keep him out and none of our people can get in, who would be a good backup candidate? And sure enough, that guy from right there in Cincinnati, the war hero, the three-time governor, very popular, loyal to the Republican Party, no scandals, Rutherford Hayes, maybe he's our number two in case we want to get Blaine out of there. Well, Hayes watched all of this and listened to it and got reports on it from his home in Spiegel Grove when the balloting began on June the 16th. And sure enough, Blaine opened up with a big lead. 285 votes on the first ballot, more than 100 next to the second place contender, Oliver Morton. But he was still about 100 votes short of a majority. Second, third, fourth, fifth ballots, really not much of a change. But then, sixth ballot, some movement. Some of Morton's supporters started to go toward Hayes, beginning in those Midwest states, Michigan, Indiana, Kentucky. Pretty soon, by the seventh ballot, it's a two-person race. Blaine's people holding solid, but a lot more of the others starting to come in Hayes' direction. By the eighth ballot, it was over. Again, Blaine's people never left him, but everybody else went for Rutherford Hayes. He captured the nomination on the eighth ballot by 5-vote majority. He was now the nominee of the Republican Party. The convention wasn't done yet. They had two more orders of business to take care of. The first was the vice presidential nomination, and because they wanted to counter the New Yorker Tilden on the Democratic ticket, they went with a New York congressman by the name of William Wheeler, who got it on the first ballot. And then the platform. The platform, sound currency, civil service reform. These were things that, of course, were important to Hayes, and also important to Hayes were the rights of blacks in the South. The Republican platform stated very clearly that the permanent pacification of the southern section of the Union and the complete protection of all of its citizens and the free enjoyment of all their rights are duties to which the Republican Party is sacredly pledged. To this end, we imperatively demand a Congress and a chief executive whose courage and fidelity to these duties shall not falter until these results are placed beyond dispute or recall. Well, that platform plank would be sorely tested. In terms of the campaign, Rutherford Hayes, basically silent. Again, pretty typical for candidates at that time. They would typically do one thing. They would offer their formal acceptance in a letter where they would state out some policy positions, and that's exactly what Hayes did about a month after the convention. He talked first about civil service reform, which was something that was increasingly important to him. According to Hayes, this system destroys the independence of separate departments of the government. It tends directly to extravagance and official incapacity. It is a temptation to dishonesty. It ought to be abolished. The reform should be thorough, radical, and complete. Very strong statement. Popular in some parts of the party, the reform-minded, not so popular in others where the political bosses were in charge, but it was consistent with the Republican platform and something that Hayes believed strongly in. Hayes also believed strongly in hard currency, we've mentioned that before, as well as this position of the rights of blacks in the South. He made the statement that what the South most needs is peace, and peace depends upon the supremacy of law. There can be no enduring peace if the constitutional rights of any portion of the people are habitually disregarded. All parts of the Constitution are sacred and must be sacredly observed. The parts that are new, no less than the parts that are old. The moral and material prosperity of the Southern states can be most effectively advanced by a hearty and generous recognition of the rights of all by all, a recognition without reserve or exception. How aggressive Hayes might be if he's elected president on this? Well, we'd have to see, but he clearly was aggressive in his posturing here in his letter of acceptance. This race was going to be close. One of the things the Republicans were wont to do is they would, quote, wave the bloody shirt. The reminder of who was on which side during the Civil War would be part of their rallying cry. By the way, Hayes served loyally 4 years as a colonel and eventually a general in the Union Army. Sam Tilden did not serve in the military. Maybe that could be a difference, particularly with the soldiers' vote and the veterans vote, which would really matter. It's going to be close. How close? Well, no one could anticipate what was about to happen next, but that makes it a story for another day. That's Rutherford Hayes and the Republican nominee from the life of Rutherford Hayes. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.